right, good morning. We'll go ahead and get started. Today we're looking at the Purchasing Transaction Detail Report in Intacct. When I sent out the invitation, I asked a question on how often people use this report. And for the most part, the majority of people who responded are using the report at least monthly. Some are using weekly and some daily. And some of the responses I had were people who are new to Intacct, so maybe aren't aware of this report yet. So we did have a few that aren't using this report. So hopefully this will help introduce you to it or refresh how you're using it now. So here's our agenda. We're going to go with what is this report, brief explanation on what it is. Then we'll get into Intacct to see how we actually run the report, how to read the report. So I've got 4 different samples of how we could use this in an actual setting. And then some of the troubleshooting, because this report can cause a little problems for people as you're trying to use it. So hopefully we can settle some of the anxieties you might have with this report. So what is this report? It's the most comprehensive report available to research purchasing transactions. This is because you can get line item detail. And so when we say line item detail, in Intacct, when we're doing a purchasing transaction, this area here in the center and here up high is header detail. We can access all this information here from like a purchasing list view, but what we can't access is the line item detail. So when we're looking at our list of purchases, when we're at our purchase requisition or we're at approval screens, that type of place, program, funding source, checkbook, item ID, all those things are elusive to us. So what we did as an alternative is we built this transaction report to help us have one area to search for this. So no purchasing view is going to give us the ability to look at funds, checkbook items, and programs. General ledger reports aren't going to include purchasing transaction document identification. So we're not going to know a PO number or a voucher number by looking at a general ledger report. We can get there by clicking on the amount to be taken to the journal entry and then following another link. So we could do that with each individual transaction. But it's this purchasing transaction detail report that's going to allow us to do this all at once rather than having to do it by each thing we see on a general ledger report. This lets us search for any period of time, and it's completely custom, so this is a report for us that wouldn't exist in other forms of Intacct. This is the type of information we'll see on this report: the date something was created, the general ledger posting date. So like for our year-end stuff, the date created and the GL posting date might not be the same because we're dating or wanting to post stuff back into September 30th of the previous year. Program, funding source, checkbook, we can see, and we can use that to filter the report. The document ID, meaning like a PO number, purchase rec number, travel request, those types of information. The state of the document, if we're looking for just something that's pending or partially converted, that kind of stuff, we can do that and we can see that on this report. The total of it, the item ID being used, the vendor, the memo, vendor document number, customer ID if we're using a customer, and then some quantity information if we're doing a blanket purchase order. And if it was converted from another document, and it'll have a link to the document that it was converted from. So we get a lot of information in this report. And then this here gives us the rundown of all of the different purchasing states that are available to us or that we would see with our documents. So when I send out the link to this presentation, you'll have this thing available to you. And in Intacct, you can actually find the purchasing states if you're still unsure once you get this presentation. You can go to your help and support area of Intacct, go to the help center, and if I look up purchasing states, it's going to give us a link to that screenshot I just had on the slide presentation. And so you can go through and see what Intacct's description is for each of those states. And it's important on this report to know what the state is because that's one of the things we can filter the report by. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with how to run this report. First, the easiest place you're going to find it is in the report center. So everybody here has access to reports, and then we can go to the report center. And depending on how you're using this area, I always have it on all reports, all applications. So it's easier to find, for me, any of the reports available to me. This report is in the purchasing application area. So you could change this to purchasing, you could scroll down to purchasing, or the easiest way is to use the search bar. So as I start typing the name of the report, what's available starts to match what I've typed. So here we are with purchasing transaction detail. And you can always add it to your favorites. So if you rely on your favorites, that'd be the easiest way to find your reports, so you don't have to go through any of the other ones that you're not using. And just like our general ledger reports, there's a few areas that are important for us to fill in. The very first thing that we're looking at, or that Intacct wants to know, is what period of time are we looking for? So I created the report to default to the fiscal current year as of whatever the current day is. So if we left this date alone, we'd expect to see any transaction that we're going to be looking for to happen in our fiscal year through today, meaning October 1st through February 4th. If I change the as of date, that would affect how long the report would run for, since it's to that date. If I wanted information from a different fiscal year, all I have to do is change the as of date. If I wanted fiscal year 21, I can change the as of date to 9/30 of 21, and now we'd be pulling information for that fiscal year. We can use the drop-down box to select from different periods of time that are available through here, which there's maybe 100 or so. Or you can just put in a start day and an end day to override the selections up here. So the options is up to you on this one. The next thing that all users will have to do is enter a checkbook and a program. You can search for a single checkbook, or you could search for all checkbooks. And what that would mean is if you have access to multiple checkbooks, this is bring in eligible any checkbook you have access to. You could enter your program, or if you have multiple programs, choose all programs, as I'm doing now. So this area, the filter area, the checkbook and program, is a required field. The next area that we need to be mindful of now is the dimension field. We have the option to choose a single funding source. So if there's a specific one you're searching for, enter it here. I'm using all checkbooks and all programs, so I probably want more than one funding source. So I could leave this blank so that any funding source that fits under this combination would come up. So if you have access to multiple funds and you want to search for all of those funds, leave funding source blank. If you want a specific funding source, then enter that funding source here. And the same thing applies for vendor ID. If I leave it blank, then that means it's going to be for all vendors, or I can enter a specific vendor and get the information for that. So, we looked up for Golden West as our vendor here. And then item ID. So when you're doing the purchasing document, you use an item ID. If there was a specific one we're looking for, office supplies, whatever, that kind of stuff, you can put that here or leave it blank for any instances the vendor is being used. So I'll leave it blank on this search. And then lastly, we need to tell Intacct what type of purchasing request is this. We can choose from one of the different purchasing transactions that are out there, or you can leave it blank for all transactions. So we've got Golden West selected, so let's try purchase order. And then the last part is the state. So that's the big table we seen a little bit earlier. What document state are we looking for purchase orders? So if we're researching which ones are still open, that they are not paid, we need to know what states those that could be, so we can select those and get that back on the report. Purchase orders don't have an approval workflow, so we don't need to worry about submitted or partially approved or declined. Purchase orders could be in draft mode. They can certainly be pending if they're waiting for us to convert them to a justification or a voucher or to close them. They could be in progress if we have converted the purchase order, but then drafted the next document instead of submitted it. It could be partially converted if it's a blanket purchase order and we haven't fully exhausted the full amount of the quantity field. So here we are with the 4 different states telling us that a purchase order is not yet paid or closed. And so we have it for Golden West, all programs and checkbooks for this fiscal year. Now we're done, we can run this report. We could view it if we want to see it on screen as an HTML document, meaning there will be hyperlinks that we can click on and go to a different field. If we want it to be ready as a PDF, we can hit print. So we're just going to view this right here on screen. And we get a pretty big list for Golden West since I'm using all checkbooks, all programs. And what we see running across is here's the date created. We have one here where the purchase order was created on January 7th. Here's the program that was used, its funding source, the checkbook, a link to the actual purchase order. So now that we have our list, if we realize this is the one that we need to pay, we could click on that link and start that process. State partially converted, so this tells us this is a blanket purchase order. It's been converted at least once before. It was opened with a $1,900 amount using the telephone fax line number 68200. There's our vendor. Here's the memo field where someone included the account number and the description of whatever the purchase order was for. The vendor document number. Here's that $1,900. $1,700 of it has been converted, leaving $184 available to still be used. And there's the requisition that generated or started this process in the first place. So on the registration form, someone had asked a question about blanket purchase orders. How do we know they're still open or what happens to them? Here's a great example here. We haven't used the full $1,900 from the quantity field of the blanket purchase order. So this purchase order remains open with an encumbrance of the $184. This will remain open until we pay that balance or until we close that balance. But it'll sit there until we take action. And this report allows us to see that very quickly, very easily for just one vendor or for all vendors if we needed to see that. So we have a question, the one with the 0 balance, is that automatically closed or does it have to be closed? Well, let's take a look. So this is the second entry. It's a purchase order that's in progress. So if I click on the purchase order to bring up the actual purchase order document, we can see on the history tab, we've got some messy activity for this. It's in progress because we have a voucher that's been drafted. And a drafted voucher is not a submitted voucher, so this isn't in line to be paid. So while the balance is 0 for what's been converted, it's not going to be paid, so that in progress state is a flag to us that we have something down down the pipe that needs our attention. So that's definitely this drafted voucher. And then we can also see that we have a declined voucher too. So this report's given us a good idea of what's happening with this. So here's that $1,400 total that we opened for Golden West. And as we slide down, the quantity is 1,400. We fully exhausted the 1,400 by converting it to something else. So the quantity remaining is $0. That's telling us the purchase order's in line to be closed. But because the vouchers haven't been paid, one is declined and one is drafted, the state of that purchase order stays in progress. If it's been closed, it's going to say converted, meaning the next document has been fully approved. It's not in a declined or draft status. So there are instances where we can see the quantity remaining is 0, but there's still an encumbrance because of those situations that we've just seen. All right, any other questions about that, the in progress or that 0 balance? Okay. Once we've ran the report and we have the information we want, either we work with it on screen, you could print this, you can export it to Excel, CSV, or another type of document rather than what you have on screen. If we want to change this report, we can hit customize and come back out here to our screen and say, we're going to rerun this now with something else. If we wanted to see all the times we've paid Golden West this year, we can make some changes to what's on screen. And I should add too about this purchase order. You could change purchase order to contract service purchase order with these same settings and you'd get the same results on your contracts. Do we have contracts that are still open, not paid, or encumbered? So we can see if they've been drafted, if they're pending, waiting for us to take action, in progress. So we have our contract, we converted it to a voucher and we've drafted it. Or is it partially converted so we still have a balance waiting for us to take action on? So you can swap out purchase order to contract service purchase order and get the same results for those. So now if we wanted to see Golden West and our vouchers, we can find voucher from our transaction type list. If we want to know what's paid, we're going to have to choose the right purchasing state here. If we leave it blank or we use these settings, we're not going to get the documents that are paid for vouchers. So the first thing we can do is say we want to remove those states. A voucher that's been paid will be in a status that says closed. And that's it. Any other status for a voucher tells us the voucher has not been paid. So we have closed. We can click done. So now we're going to look for closed vouchers for Golden West for this fiscal year through today. And now we can view, and in a moment here on screen will come up all the times we've paid Golden West. And the same information we're going to get no matter what when we run the report is the date, the posting date, the program, the funding source, and all the way through. None of these columns will ever change for this report. We have the link to the voucher if we needed to go into that voucher and get the check number. And we can see it all the way through what purchase order paid that voucher, the vendor document number, all the relevant information we might want for Golden West. And so if I click on this voucher 65250, for those of you who look at the payment documents might see that once your voucher is approved, a new tab pops up called payment details. So when we go here, we can see it's been paid. The bill is $1,500, paid $1,500. And there's the payment information. It was paid by ACH. there's the ACH confirmation number and the date that that went out. And this type of request can apply to any type of payment document. So all the payments should end up being closed. So if you're wanting to look up your non-PO vouchers, if you're wanting to look at balance sheet requisitions, if you work in the finance office, or payroll vouchers, any type of document that directly gets paid, a justification workflow, program director requisition, these are what you're going to use as the transaction type with the state of closed. And we can also look for declined requests. So if we weren't interested in what's pending or what's already been paid, now we want to know what's been declined. Do we have any declined Golden West vouchers out there? Well, we can close that out and find declined from the list. So our declined vouchers for Golden West, we know we should at least see one. Here's that one. So we've only had one declined, or the one that's still sitting as declined this fiscal year. And so we can see it's been sitting as declined since November for $409. There's the link to that voucher, and there's the amount that's sitting declined. So as a program, looking up for your declined vouchers or your declined non-PO vouchers, your declined justifications, making this a regular part of your work experience, whether you're doing, depending on how busy your program is. If you're doing payments all the time, this might be a daily or weekly report, or maybe you're going to use this and look it up once a month. Find your declines to make sure that, you know, if THPO's Golden West lines get shut off, this might be the reason why. Nice thing about this report, if we're looking at saying, I want to make this a regular part of working for my program, is you have this option to process and store. So it basically works kind of like a schedule. When do we want to run this report? On what day? So if we wanted to run this on March 1st, great. I'm going to include the March 1st date. We're going to store this in Intacct. So maybe we'll call this report declined vouchers, you know, whatever name you're going to give it. What format do you want this report in? HTML is what we're seeing on the screen right now. Do you want it as a PDF or one of the Excel types or in text? So we get different options, and so we can choose that. And so what's going to happen is on March 1st, this report will run, and I'll get an email when it's ready saying I can now go to stored reports and view this report. Reports being processed, check stored reports for the report results. So if we choose HTML, will the hyperlinks work? Yes, as long as you'll be signed into Intacct. So yes, it'll open up just like how this report is basically what you'll see, so that the hyperlinks will still take you to the voucher or the purchase order, whatever type of report you've chosen to run. But it's an easy way to go through here and schedule yourself a few reports in advance, so you don't have to always remember to do that for you. Intacct already has your little schedule going, so it can do that. If you don't already have the settings on and you want to be able to be notified if you're going to use this, you can go to your personal settings here, to your preferences, and there's an area, a checkbox to say you want to be emailed when the process and stored report is done running. So check that and save that setting if it's not already set. By default, that's not selected, so you might have to do that. All right. So we've seen how we can do that for our vouchers for a specific vendor. If we wanted to just see the month of February, and in this instance, we're going to look for something for finance. Do we have any purchasing documents we've done with IT as our vendor? And so we're looking for the month of February, February 1 to February 4. Using the start and end date overrides what's selected up here. Here's our vendor ID, so it's a specific one. If we're not sure what type of document we might have used it, we can leave the type blank. And we can leave the state blank. We want any purchasing document, regardless of its status, to come up for IT. So now that we click View, when this finishes running, now we can see here's all that information for IT. And I think I used 21 as the date. I meant to use 22. I keep typing 21. When this report gets done running, we're gonna get a message that no data found for selected filters. So this kind of takes us into that troubleshooting part. You don't have to be discouraged if you get this message when you're running the report. That doesn't mean you didn't do it right. What that means to tell us is, for the month of February, the finance office has not prepared a purchasing transaction using IT as its vendor. If we expected to see a purchasing document for IT, our first thing that we need to do to check is, did we use the correct period of time? We thought it was February. Maybe it was January, so we could change the date. Let's try January 1st through today. Now we have transactions that maybe this is what we were expecting to see. And in this instance, we can see 5 closed documents. There's the non-PO voucher and there's a voucher. We didn't specify what type of transaction. We know that these 5 documents were all paid in January. We can see the amounts for those. If that's what we're looking for, great, we were done. All we had to do was modify the date. And we've changed that from no data to now having data. So don't worry about the no data part. Just go back and modify that report. It might be your day. Or if you're expecting for a certain funding source, remove the funding source and search without that in first. So just keep in mind when running the report, keep in mind the time period you're using, these dimension filters we're using. Get a good understanding of what transactions are going to create or release encumbrances. So if we're looking for an encumbrance balance in our financial report, are we searching the right types of transactions to see? And you have to familiarize yourself with those purchasing states. Looking for a declined purchase order will always result in no data found, but looking for a declined voucher could end up turning over like we saw with the Golden West bill. Or if you find no decline activity, that might be fine too. You just might not have any. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for coming.